Good evening and welcome to this virtual book talk this evening, hosted by Van Cortlandt House Museum, joined by Josh Trujillo and Levi Hastings, the author and illustrator of the graphic novel Washington's Gay General, The Legends and Loves of Baron von Steuben. So, quick introduction. My name is Margaret Holmes. I'm the director of Van Cortlandt House Museum. The museum is the oldest house in the borough of the Bronx. It was built in 1748. It was once known as the Lower Yonkers Plantation. There was also a mill on site. The Van Cortlandts gained their wealth by global trade through early New Amsterdam and New York colonial settlement with areas like the Caribbean and Latin America, and later operated the plantation on the site where the museum stands now, operated by the labor of enslaved Africans. Van Cortlandt Park also has 1,000 years of indigenous history on the site. We welcome you to visit us on site sometime. We are open every Wednesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we have free admission for Bronx residents, free for everyone on Thursdays. And we're going to also offer free admission for Pride Month as well. Now, this graphic novel describes one of our favorite Revolutionary War characters, and he also has a connection to Van Cortlandt Park because the Hessian troops were quartered near where Van Cortlandt House stands, and the area of Kingsbridge, Riverdale, Spuyten Duyvil, now sort of what we consider the area of Van Cortlandt Park, was a very strategic and important location during the Revolution. We're also celebrating Pride, and so we think that von Steuben is a perfect person for us to discuss as we kick off Pride Month. I just want to quickly tell you about a few events that we have going on at the museum. Saturday, June 10th, we're going to be doing Between Enemy Lines, which is a Revolutionary War hike through Van Cortlandt Park. That's free admission, and that will take you on a sort of geographical and biographical history of what life was like during the most tumultuous years during in the Bronx during the American Revolution. That will be a free event, and registration will open on June 7th. On July 13th, we are going to be hosting Carla and Jim Keyes, musicians and historical interpreters, presenting This Man's a Spy. They're a musical retelling of the treasonous plot between American General Benedict Arnold and British Major John Andre during the Revolution. And on July 17th, we will have another free program with Misty Cook Davids, an herbalist and cultural consultant of the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohican Native Americans. She will be doing a program on the natural medicines here on the Lenape homelands located in the Bronx. She will talk about the history of the medicines as well as the gathering, drying, and preservation of them. So we hope to see you at some of those events. So I would love to introduce Josh and Levi. Levi is an Emmy-nominated illustrator with a focus in queer history and the natural world. He's published 5 children's books in addition to the graphic novel Washington's Gay General. His work with Josh has been featured in the Ignates Award-winning anthology Be Gay, Do Comics. He lives in Seattle with his husband and dog. And Josh Trujillo is an award-winning writer, editor, and narrative designer based in LA. He has worked with clients including Marvel, Gearbox Studios, Telltale Games, and Netflix, among others. In 2021, he created the queer Captain America, Aaron Fisher, for Marvel Comics. Born and raised in Southern California, Josh enjoys theme parks, trading card games, YouTube video essays, and his dog Pretzel, and he's always ready for the next adventure. Now, without further ado, Josh and Levi, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you, everyone who's able to make time this evening or afternoon, depending if you're on the West Coast like us. We're always happy to talk about the book, and we're definitely happy to talk about von Steuben. But of course, we got to talk about ourselves a little bit. Um, like you heard, my name's Josh. I'm a comic book and video game writer. I'm currently at a studio called Gearbox Studios. They're known for the Borderlands series and Tiny Tina's Wonderland, among others. This year, I have a story in DC Pride 2025, and I've done other works for DC and Marvel, including Captain America, Blue Beetle, and currently Aquaman, which will be releasing this summer. And Levi and I have been collaborating for, a decade now. But here you go.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Levi. Thank you for showing up for this. I'm an illustrator based in Seattle, and I've done a few books. Yeah, as Josh said, we've been collaborating for quite a long time. We met at a comic convention in Seattle 10 years ago, I think, exactly. And we've been working on projects ever since. A lot of them were for the Nib, the late wonderful Nib website. But yeah, so I have a few books out. Here's some of my most recent book is Are You a Friend of Dorothy, written by Kyle Lukoff, also a queer history book for very young readers. It's about the queer coding that took place during the Lavender Scare most prominently, but it sort of takes you through the history of the phrase "Are you a friend of Dorothy?" which is common parlance among queer people. But like, what does it mean? Where does it come from? And all the ways in which it was used to like help people find each other when it was dangerous to be out in the open. So a little timely, but yeah. So that's me, and we're very excited to talk about our book.
Yeah, so we're going to be reading a couple of selections from Washington's Gay General, and we'll be fielding some questions afterwards. So if you want to drop those in the chat, we can answer them at the end of our speaking. And before we begin, I'm going to start by reading a short comic I did for the nib.com several years ago with Maya Kobabe, a very talented illustrator. You might be familiar with her work, Genderqueer, which is one of the most banned books in the country. And so Maya has been fighting the good fight for authors' rights and queer rights and everything in between. And so I'm very excited to read this passage, which feels more timely than ever. Queer Pride Month. Every June during his presidency, Barack Obama declared lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Heritage Month. I have a copy of one of the declarations hanging in my living room. I think about it every day. This year, breaking with tradition, the White House chose to say nothing. It feels small to complain about this with so much else happening. It's hardly a blip compared to other very real issues. But to me and to people like me, it's an especially cutting slight. Queer history is everyone's history. But only in recent years have we been able to discuss it in public. In the past and continuing today, queer people have been oppressed through anonymity. To not know our heritage is to be isolated, to be weak, to be invisible. My hope lies not in colored lights over the White House lawn, but in our visibility. Let them know who we are, be proud, be loud for those who cannot. Make sure they never forget our voices. So you can read that on thenib.com along with some other incredible nonfiction work. They've archived the entire site, and they have a magazine that ran for a couple of years as well. If you can find some back issues of that, I highly recommend it. But this book, Washington's Gay General, originated as a short comic on thenib.com. We released it not necessarily knowing what the response would be, but it really blew up. I mean, right, Levi?
Yeah, it was pretty shocking. The what a good response we had to it because we thought for us it was just a very weird historical curiosity that we were not even sure that the Nib would publish it, but we just kind of threw it out there and they were like, "Yeah, go for it." And we're like, "Okay." So we had a great time making it, and it turned out like a lot of people really responded to it. So that was sort of the seed that created this book.
Yeah, so I think a lot of our shared work, Levi working in illustration and me working in writing primarily, we want to kind of capture queer stories, discover them, create them if we have to, but we want people to see themselves in the past. And so much of that has been hidden from us. We're very lucky to have a figure like von Steuben, who we can read into his life and kind of see queer parallels to what's happening today, but you're probably wondering why. And so the first passage I'll read will be kind of going into that. I found someone while scrolling the internet on a sleepless night, someone extraordinary, a true queer hero right in the middle of our textbooks, a hero who deserved their place in the spotlight, a founder of our nation. Frederick Wilhelm August Heinrich Ferdinand von Steuben, America's first Inspector General. Baron von Steuben is probably the greatest military leader in the history of the United States. The Baron helped transform the Continental Army through regimented discipline he learned in Prussia. His lasting contributions forever transformed the battlefield and are still celebrated today. He trained farmers how to fight back against the greatest military power the world had ever known and somehow win. And he did this without even being able to speak English. He lived life fearlessly on the battlefield and everywhere else. But more importantly, I would also say he was incredibly gay before the term even existed. In Europe and in America, von Steuben's proclivities were well known. His addiction to the finer things in life, his flair for style, the annoying, untrained greyhound that rarely left his side. That's Azor. We love Azor. His many suspected lovers, including Prussian royalty, and just the overall sense of extra that permeated every fiber of his being. But that still doesn't explain why I spend my nights researching a Prussian general who's been dead for over 200 years, or why Levi, who grew up in Idaho, is drawn to the imagery of the American Revolution. We're not real historians. I barely graduated high school. We've never served in the military. We don't speak German, and we're 3,000 miles away from the nearest revolutionary battlefield. But the truth is, we couldn't help but be interested. This is a story about faraway places and vast kingdoms battling for the future of civilization, sweeping romances during wartime, and scrappy rebels determined to get what is theirs. Secrets and executions and lies, so many lies. And in the middle of it is this short gay man in the 1700s who never considered his sexuality an obstacle, who never let that perceived flaw stop him from greatness. We all have something to learn in this regard. Okay, but how can we call a dead guy from the 1700s gay? Even if he was buried in sequins, is that appropriate? Is it accurate? This is something queer history, and I personally, along with Levi, struggle with a lot in researching this stuff. Gender, sexuality, love, and marriage are all totally different concepts than they were living through the American Revolution. Just like in my own lifetime, the use of the term queer has changed from a slur to an affirming statement. We're looking at the colonial era from a modern point of view, which means we are assigning sexualities to a world where those labels simply did not exist. And there's no way of knowing how these people might have seen themselves. That's an important distinction. Like it or not, many straight people experience sexual and even romantic feelings for the same gender identity. This could have been the case for von Steuben. After all, many of his lovers were married to people of this opposite sex and even had children with them. Their homosexual romances didn't define how they defined themselves. But centuries later, I believe that Baron von Steuben was unmistakably gay. He was in a throuple, if not a fourple. He had naked cocktail parties with his younger cadets. He probably had a love affair with the Prince of Prussia, and possibly his brother, the King of Prussia. The myths of this man are legendary, and the myths and legends are what I'm most interested in. Baron von Steuben is America's founding daddy. So you can see many of our beautiful examples of some of the work that Levi did, and hopefully we can talk about his process after the next selection. We skip ahead further into the book, and Levi will take us from there.
Okay, here we go. When I visit historic sites, I'm always struck by how rigid the lives of these people were. There's a confining social structure piled on top of these daily routines that if you fail to do them, you'll die. Every spoon serves a specific purpose. There's even a special room for you to die in. How do you have time to find yourself when you have so much day-to-day crap to wade through? Even now, a lot of people die without ever coming to terms with their true feelings. In von Steuben's time, many others found the courage to live their queer lives freely, but this was never a simple undertaking. Jemima Wilkinson was raised a devout Quaker when she contracted typhus. Very religious and well educated in Christian and Jewish scriptures, the 14-year-old girl began to have intense religious hallucinations during her illness. She fainted, and when she woke, the girl claimed that Jemima had died. They now insisted on being referred to as Public Universal Friend. Hoof then dressed in gender-neutral clothing and rejected he or she pronouns. Hoof took on a shockingly successful career as a religious leader, espousing the new dogma, the Universal Society of Friends. It cribbed heavily on Quaker beliefs, but was very progressive for its times. The group was fiercely pacifist and abolitionist, and many of the church duties were performed by women. The Society of Universal Friends had a sizable Black following, including some who had been freed as a result of the Society's influence. When Poof died in 1819, the new religion fell apart. The house they worshipped out of and lived is now a landmark of New York State. Charity Bryant was a Massachusetts seamstress who wrote loving and, dare I say, sapphic poems as a pastime. One day she was introduced to Sylvia Drake, another seamstress, and the two instantly connected. Both incredibly religious, they found themselves inexplicably drawn to one another. They frequently exchanged notes and met whenever they could. Soon the two were inseparable and lived together in a small tailoring business they co-owned. Their unique kinship made their business an enormous success. They were fixtures of the community, always seen together and often sharing a purse. Sylvia and Charity's families warmly accepted this pairing. In fact, their loving nephew's recollections are the reason we know anything about them at all. If I were permitted to draw the veil of private life, I would briefly give you the singular and, to me, interesting story of two maiden ladies who dwell in this valley. I would tell you how, in their youthful days, they took each other as companions for life, and how this union, no less sacred to them than the tie of marriage, has subsisted in uninterrupted harmony for more than 40 years. Charity and Sylvia lived together until Charity fell ill. As Charity tried to recover, Sylvia had an adult-sized cradle built for her love. That way, she could rock Charity to sleep each night. Charity died in 1839. Sylvia moved in with the family members until the two were buried together in 1859 after Sylvia's passing. We only know about Charity and Sylvia's lives because Charity exhaustively documented their lives together, and the family wanted to honor their memories after death. This is an enormous privilege afforded to queer people who are often distant from their parents, siblings, and communities. While the records of mediocre heterosexual couples may live on for centuries, queer people rarely get that luxury. The One Archives in Los Angeles have the largest collection of queer history and artifacts in the world. It sounds impressive, but it's a modest operation. As one of the very few places that focus on queer American history, the volunteers and handful of employees find themselves completely overwhelmed with donations of all kinds of stuff. They're always welcome, but finding the context and meaning to some of them can be a struggle. Oftentimes, homemade scrapbooks are donated from thrift stores featuring assorted clippings of men from magazines. They have dozens of them dating back decades from all sorts of walks of life. Yes, some of it is porn, but a lot of it is more innocent. It's more of an art. Image galleries of completely unknown lives. Most leave no clue of who owned them. I imagine for a lot of the owners, their lives would have been over if they were ever discovered to be queer. So now we have their scrapbooks, scraps of lives, but we don't know anything about the people who made them. We're forced to create a narrative around what little we do know. And this is just the stuff that isn't intentionally destroyed, lost, or ruined from the passage of time. Until recently, it was dangerous to document our private lives. That's why this kind of research is so important. At the end of her life, my grandma told me about a gay uncle of hers, Harold. This was the first of any of her children had heard of this person. The story goes, Harold fought in World War II, and when it ended, he moved to San Francisco with his gay high school sweetheart. I can confirm his military service and where he lived, but I don't think I'll ever know anything about his partner or what their lives were like in gay San Francisco in the 1960s. Those lives and stories are just gone.
So this is kind of one of the driving themes of the book, I would say, right? Is kind of uncovering this past that feels so incomplete. And we wanted to expand on that by showing some of these characters like Jemima Wilkinson, or Public Universal Friend, I should say, and Sylvia and Charity Bryant, that adult sized cradle still exists at a university on the East Coast, I believe in Massachusetts. So we do have, like I said, scraps of these people's lives, but it's kind of hard to really pin down the specifics. And these are only the ones we know about. We don't know how many people were really out there living freely queer lives or being accepted by family or not. Um, so that's kind of been a bit of a struggle in researching the book, but also very eye-opening about it.
Yeah, and we wanted to include these as well to contextualize, the time period a little better and, illustrate that von Steuben was not the only one, right? So the idea that there can only be one, or like homosexuality was invented in the 60s, or whatever people kind of try to come up with to make it sound like, oh, why are there all these gays suddenly? And it's like, well, no, actually they've always been here.
Right. We've always been here, and we just lacked kind of the language to kind of do that. The term homosexual only existed in the 1800s, long after von Steuben had passed. And then the identity of gay, the evolving identity of homosexuality, bisexuality, what have you, is something that we're still formulating today. I think since Levi and I kind of came of age, we've seen so many evolving labels, and so much the conversation and about sexuality and romance and love has certainly changed. Now, gay marriage being legal has certainly opened the doors for all sorts of things we never thought were possible. Let's see.
Do you want me to take this, or
Oh,
you
yeah,
want to do it, Josh?
you don't mind.
Okay. Like America, von Steuben's story is one of unrealized promise and disappointment. His sense of longing, of unrealized potential, feels more real to me than the other myths we perpetuate about our founding fathers. Not just the military stuff, but his human side as well. The Baron built a family out of the men of his life, friends and lovers and everything in between. And he made the most of what he had, often defying the judgment of society. He refused to let anyone or anything get in his way. If that doesn't ring true to the queer experience, nothing does.
So, um, two summers ago, I had the luxury of being able to go to the East Coast and see some of these sites with kind of the knowledge that I carried with me in researching the book. I was very honored to go to Yale Museum of Art, and see some of the artifacts that they had from von Steuben's life. Not only did I get to carry a sword, you can see that on the right, that he actually used. It was ceremonial, but it was still very heavy. I was so afraid of breaking it. I was like, oh, should I be delicate with it? And they're like, it's made of like solid metal. You're not going to be able to break it. So that was something. And then we saw this beautiful portrait that featured the sword as well, along with a small kind of gold keepsake box that was actually addressed to Benjamin Walker, one of his most notable companions, we'll say. So just being able to have those tactile artifacts and objects that kind of connect us to him are so important and so meaningful. I'm really grateful for the Daughters of the American Revolution out of Brooklyn for kind of facilitating me being able to see this site, and also just for opening my eyes to the greater revolutionary, not fandom, but I guess the historians, the armchair historians and the professional ones that really live and breathe this kind of material. Uh, Levi, have you had any kind of funny experiences or things to come out of producing the book?
I wish I had some good anecdotes. I feel like you've had much more fun than I have in terms of having your sort of in real life adventures. Mine have all been a little more intellectual and experiential, but um, I will say like making this book has been like it was such a journey, and it was in many ways there were times when I felt like we were in Valley Forge together, just because it was such a, a long, difficult process.
Um,
And now it's like, the book has been out for almost 2 years, and we're, 3 years plus removed from the process of making it. But it's been really gratifying to sort of see the way that people have responded to it, and seem to really enjoy the story and the contextualizing. I will say what one of the most surprising aspects that I've kept hearing from people really respond to our um, presence in the book, and this was something that we had struggled with in the development process of including ourselves as characters in the book, and people seem to really um, resonate. That resonates with people as a way of sort of like, we're kind of guiding them through this story from with giving it a personal touch rather than this sort of detached, omniscient narrator voice. It's like we're part of the story, and people have really mentioned that to me as a one of their favorite aspects. So that's kind of been a surprise.
Yeah, I think we owe a lot of that to our editors, Charlotte Greenbaum and Mariko Tamaki. Mariko, in particular, was doing a lot of note passes on the book, especially in the earliest drafts. And the note I kept getting was, "I want to see more of you in the book." And I was like, "Oh, I put my opinions, and there's some little asides there." And she's like, "No, I literally want to see both of you in the book." And so that's why we appear, my dog appears. It really is an extension of kind of our lives lived. And if you go and are if you pick up a copy of the book, you'll see there are more kind of asides, whether it be kind of Levi and my, like, our formative queer pop culture references that kind of influenced us early on. For me, it was like anime and Digimon and stuff. And then I think for you, it was more like Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah, right. Um, it was a way of us to sort of contextualize and really answer the question of like, why do we care about this person in this time in history, in this day and age? Why do we, like, as people living in the current moment, why would we want to spend all of this time with von Steuben? And so I think by contextualizing it in our own personal lives, I think that resonates with the reader as well. We kind of connect it. We kind of bring that, we string that connection together through time. By the way, if anybody has any questions, please write them in the chat. We're gonna do some question and answers at some point. But um, yeah, I think it's been a very interesting experience, kind of watching this live on its own out in the world.
Yeah, for definitely. And I was just saying before we started the call that, the book I've seen at the African American History Museum, at the Smithsonian. I've seen it at gay bars that do little pop-up book events. I've seen it everywhere in between. We get featured in podcasts sometimes. We're featured in the curriculum for certain high school and college classes. And so the book has really kind of grown beyond what we ever could have expected, especially because it started with a very modest collaboration. We did a fictional Revolutionary War romance, kind of spinning out of what Hamilton mania, I think. We were both. Do you want to talk a little bit about what drew you to this era? Because I remember we were talking about what do you feel like drawing, and you immediately jumped on, I think, this era in particular.
Yeah, I think we I remember we were sitting at a convention together for, the millionth time, and we had been talking about what kind of what kind of stories we'd want to do, and I had sort of really been thinking about the American Revolution and the sort of period of time, from a like a stylistic and visual standpoint as well, just because I've always been drawn to the aesthetics of that time, and just sort of particularly the myth making around it. And I thought, in terms of like romantic, particularly queer romantic storytelling, I just hadn't seen a lot of romances come from that time period, and I think it was, rich for rich with possibilities, shall we say. And so, that's kind of when we came up with the idea of like, let's just do this short romance comic and see what happens. And that even, like that got traction at the comic shows too, at FlameCon and such.
Yeah, we printed
So
it
pe
several times. We were in Entertainment Weekly mentioned us online. Remember that
that
was
was wild.
that was wild, considering the book had maybe 100 copies printed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we've kind of been on this track for a while. And it's been really fun. Okay, so there's a few questions in here. Josh, you want to take one?
Can you talk briefly about the illustrative technique? I love the look. I love the look too. Let's see if we can find a good example. This is a good one. Do you want to talk a
Yeah,
little bit
I love
about
this one. Yeah.
your illustrative process?
Well, first of all, we were limited to a two-color palette, so that definitely limited our options, in a good way, I think, because it was a way of kind of narrowing down our, I would go, normally I would spend too much time torturing myself over color options and palettes to get anywhere. So this was actually a really great restriction that I think helped out the book a lot. And it created, I definitely wanted to go with kind of like a vintage comic feel with sort of these two colors, just the black and blue on white. And I'm still really surprised at how much we were able to get out of it in terms of tone and texture. So but yeah, I was really inspired by sort of vintage comics from, the 50s and 60s that were very limited palette, like one or two colors. And, obviously that sort of the hand-drawn style is a little bit, it's a little bit rough. It's a little bit I won't say sloppy, but it's a little bit improvised and expressive in a way that I think it was both just as a necessity to produce this many pages. I couldn't be a perfectionist, and also I think it added a little bit of sort of like pen and ink style that you see in a lot of the letters of the time, right? Sort of the quill and ink pot kind of thing. So um, yeah, and I wanted it to be approachable and not super stuffy in a way that sometimes these historical time periods are, when they're interpreted in a modern way or for a modern audience, they tend to be a little stuffy and formal. And I wanted this to really be approachable and kind of fluid in that way.
Yeah,
Um,
like kind of the not imperfect, the kind of spontaneous nature of your art in this book in particular, because a lot of what you do is kind of evocative of you do a lot of nature, you do a lot of dinosaurs in particular, and those are more kind of staid and steady portraits in some ways. And I think this one has a lot more kinetic energy. You're really able to bring some life into a style that we associate with these very dry paintings we see on the walls of museums, right? Or in documentaries.
yeah, right. And he's such a, flamboyant character. Everything that we were reading in all of our research in him was like he was very over the top in kind of every way. And so I definitely wanted to reflect that, particularly like on those early pages when we're kind of introducing him, with his sort of his flourish and his frills and his bows and jackets and jewelry, and that was really fun.
Oh,
So
yeah. And we so much
and
of it takes place in Prussia too, which is a whole might as well be a fantasy
yes.
compared to even the American Revolutionary War.
Yes, yeah, that was the another interesting kind of journey that the book took that I think we're not expecting is that like the first half of the book is basically like we don't hit America until like halfway through the book. Like so much of his life in Prussia is just fascinating, and we go down these rabbit holes of like Frederick the Great and all of his, his dark tale of, queer romance thwarted, and it's like um and again, those all kind of lend themselves to a different visual style than I was necessarily expecting when we first started out. So, um, yeah, it's fun to talk about this because I haven't thought about it in a while. But okay, so next to this is not a question, but Alex just said, noting that America's founding daddy is hilariously brilliant, which I agree. I think it's my favorite phrase in the book.
Oh,
You were,
I
yeah.
mean, hi Alex, thank you for the kind words. But yeah, it's it felt natural, it kind of there is an age disparity between him and these alleged lovers, I will say. And that is something he took on a paternal role as a drill master, and also kind of in his private life, after the war ended, he was essentially couch surfing with a lot of his younger cadets. There's and a lot of the book also talks about kind of his post-war life, kind of the fraught financial situation of it. The government didn't agree to pay him until the war was over, and when the war ended, they were all too happy to forget about that for a while. It wasn't until Alexander Hamilton really petitioned on von Steuben's behalf that they were able to get any sort of compensation. And I think there was a bit of envy with von Steuben's financial situation compared to the grand estates of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, et cetera. So that was kind of interesting. And even just in writing the book, we found so many kind of pockets of history and side characters that kind of made the book feel more alive. I thought going into it, we were going to spotlight von Steuben exclusively, but we ran into all these characters that were too interesting to ignore, and really highlighted like Frederick the Great. There's a million books written about him, but I would love to dig into one in kind of the style that we did with the Baron as well.
Okay, so to that question, the next question is, what primary sources did you use to support your thesis? And um, oh, your thesis and specific example from the Baron's life. So yeah, do you want to talk about your research process?
Yeah, so the first thing I looked at was what I believe to be the first English biography written about Frederick von Steuben that was written after his death. It's The Life of Frederick William von Steuben by Frederick Kapp. And I found that surprisingly breezy and fun to read. You think of a 300-year-old book as being very dry, but he lived such an outlandish life. And, there are so many examples of the affection between von Steuben and his cadets. I believe it was Benjamin North, it might have been Walker, who the first time he saw von Steuben, he referred to him as an angel. And von Steuben had this, who was a shorter man, had a bit of a proclivity for taller, gentleman, he brought a bunch of tall soldiers with him, basically servants, to come to America with him, and he called them his Prussian giants. And the naked underwear parties, these are all small things that by themselves feel kind of isolated, but I feel like collectively they paint a picture of a man that was either just very warmly affectionate. There is kind of that thing about Revolutionary War letters where it feels like all the educated men of the time were trying to outdo each other with their flowery language, right? It's like you read an Alexander Hamilton letter and it's almost like he's trying to measure his intellect or his vocabulary against any number of people he was writing to. So the Cat biography was the first one I went to. More recent books like The Drill Master of Valley Forge, or a lot of there's a great journal article about homosexuality in Prussia that I found very informative. I can drop a link, or if you want to email me personally, I'm happy to share some of my research. I have a lot of links to various things I can pull up as well. But this book really started as an exploration of the legend of von Steuben. And for a man who kind of lived a solitary life, by most accounts, it was anything but. He was surrounded by friends. He was surrounded by people who loved him dearly. Even after he passed, he had an enormous following. There's still von Steuben days in Germany and in places like Ohio. And even on the White House lawn at Lafayette Park, they have this beautiful statue. It's very, how would I call it? It's erotic in a homosexual, in a Grecian way, and it's dedicated not just to von Steuben, but to the two men he adopted as sons, Benjamin North and my God, I just said his other name, Benjamin Walker and William North. So it's unusual for a statue to be dedicated to a founding father and also his sons and friends. I believe I have it right here. Colonel William North, Major Benjamin Walker, aides and friends to General von Steuben. There's a huge plaque just on the back of the statue, and that seemed so curious to me, considering that the statue wasn't erected until the 1920s. All the statues in Lafayette Park, this is an aside, I'm sorry, but all the statues in Lafayette Park came with these enormous ceremonies. The president's daughter at the time read poetry before each one. I believe for von Steuben's statue, over 10,000 people showed up to the unveiling. And so there's also a sister statue in Potsdam as well. And so this was a big sign of connectivity between the German people and the American people, kind of showing and sharing this legend, this myth of this man. So if you know where to look, I would say the clues are there. But I do maintain that we are exploring this larger than life character who has never been explored kind of through a queer lens. We know so much about his life and his military service. We know a lot about his life in Prussia as a general. He was a prisoner of war. He was injured in battle. He kind of lied his way to the top. But also he was thoroughly competent. Just a really fascinating, kind of perfectly imperfect subject, I would say. What do we have here? What's a surprising collaboration or connection that came out of this book? Has it sent you on any new research paths? Levi, have you been digging into any Wikipedia wormholes or anything like that?
I mean, I would say I mean, off the top of my head, I feel like the most surprising thing for me was the Frederick the Great stuff. Just because I really didn't know much about him at all, and turns out he's a much more fascinating and complicated and villainous figure, obviously for very obvious reasons. But you sort of you start to understand that a little more once you understand his queerness and the punishment he received for expressing his queerness at a young age, right? And you sort of see that lesson being carried down in very toxic ways. So, I mean, otherwise we have our other character who we've discovered, our sort of gay paleontologist, Napsha from Transylvania, who
Yeah.
we've found lots of fun, juicy tidbits about as well.
Yeah, we're obsessed
Um,
with this gay paleontologist who was openly gay during World War One, Franz Napska. He popularized a lot of theories about dinosaurs evolving into birds, and he also had a focus on kind of how dinosaurs lived. You know, at the time, people were just obsessed with how to put the bones together, and no one really thought about what do they eat, where do they sleep, how do they inhabit these prehistoric spaces. But he was a spy, he was a thief. His life ended very tragically. He is not a hero figure by any stretch of the imagination. But I think working on the von Steuben book really opened our eyes to these complicated figures in history. What does it support gay rights, but also gay wrongs? And I think von Steuben's a little guilty of that at times as well.
yeah, it's been really interesting to wrestle with some of these things as we learn about these queer historical figures where we do have to reconcile some of their less admirable qualities or behaviors, right? And kind of again kind of contextualize them with the understanding that like none of these people are, these are all flawed people living in the time period that, doing the best with the circumstances that are that they're living within, right? And both von Steuben and Nopska was like, they were both kind of nefarious in various ways. And but like the thing that is kind of the through line that is so fascinating is their openness about their sexuality. And I think part of that is class related too, right? There's like there are class issues involved where they have the privilege or the power to escape any punishment, or and in von Steuben's case, there's sort of like he had this privilege until he didn't, right? Until that privilege was taken away, and then he had to flee the country. So there's this sort of like, in many ways, Nopska had a similar trajectory where it was like it was perfectly fine when you have all the power and the privilege, and then suddenly when that's stripped away, you sort of have to, uh, you know, either flee for your life or, do some dastardly deeds. But I do think it's fascinating. So to that point, Clint is saying, I was wondering how you'd like to speak to your feelings about the book and its message. How the book and its message have changed in recent years, especially in considering recent news that they are changing the name of the USNS Harvey Milk. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
Josh,
I mean,
current.
unfortunately, that's the first of many injustices and probably not the last, right? But this effort to kind of erase what they consider DEI history is baffling, and I think it really creates an incomplete view of history. I was talking to someone, and we both realized we on the West Coast we only learn about the Revolutionary War in like first and second grade, and that's enough to indoctrinate someone, right? It keeps you from having to ask the tough questions, the critical questions of who these founding fathers were and what their lives were like. I think in our time, even what Thomas Jefferson, kind of the emergence of um, his mistress and everything to come from that has really just been kind of surprising for a lot of people who think of them as these pure figures that live on coins and in monuments. Um, but I it's greatly unfortunate that this queer erasure is happening, and I think it really speaks to the need for us to uncover these figures in our private readings in our communities. I'm really grateful for uh, this event and others like it because we don't have enough opportunities to explore our queer past, and we don't have enough backing from institutions to do that, especially now. It's a hope that you'll take the book with you, and if it'll inspire you to look up some of your own queer history. You might have relatives who were queer. I had my great uncle, who I never met, obviously, but just wondering about his life in San Francisco in the '60s has really turned me on to exploring what that world was like. And that might as well be as in a 200 years ago, considering what the world is like today versus then.
Yeah, I would actually consider that like that would be a very interesting sort of side quest for you, you know, is to like dig into the like discover try to go back and find more information about this long lost uncle and kind of see where that leads you. That could be a fun little novella of some sort.
Oh, for
You
sure.
know,
Where are my genealogists at, right? Like,
yeah.
let's get a tree going. Um, let's see.
Well, but so yeah, I mean, so just to on that note a little bit, like I think it's so the military connection I think is very interesting, right? The way that it's sort of like queerness in the military is so politicized and has been so politicized, and yet this is like the foundation of the American military, right? Like he wrote the book on the American military. Um, you know, and you know, Josh, you and I are not particularly militaristic. We don't have, you know, a real like rah rah um vibe about us necessarily, right? I think we're both pretty pacifists by nature, but it's undeniable what an influence the military has had on queer people in providing opportunity, in providing access to right, like a way out, right? The military has always been used as sort of an escape valve for people who are living in these communities who want to branch out and find new experiences and find ways of reinventing themselves. And so it's always fascinating to me in, you know, kind of in a negative way, I think, just like why it's so, you know, like the trans ban now in the military, and now like we're gonna scrub the name, and it's sort of like the idea that these people don't exist in the military is it's very silly, right? It's sort of it's very short-sighted to me.
Yeah,
Um,
I have a I'm my family has military ties going back at least 3 generations. My grandpa was a supply sergeant in World War II, and he was part of a tank destroyer brigade. He was the second wave on Normandy, and we're very proud of him fighting fascists. And I hope that in some way our book kind of highlights you know, freedom and equality in a way that we can. But you know, I have a cousin who was in the Navy who was a pilot for them, and he is an open homosexual. He lives happily with his husband now, and they're very annoying dogs. And and since doing the book, we've found so many queer veterans and people who are currently in the military reaching out to us. It's interesting how even my uncle who was fighting in Vietnam, he was very familiar with von Steuben. He didn't know any of this other stuff. He didn't know about William North and Benjamin Walker. He didn't know about his life in Prussia or why he was forced out of Prussia. Um, and so he's very well known in military circles. He's definitely the kind of guy your dad gets a book for every Christmas. You know, he's one of the Drill Master of Valley Forge is a very wonderful book. I highly recommend it if you want um, more of history about von Steuben, especially highlighting his kind of military excellence and how he survived that brutal winter in Valley Forge and beyond. It's kind of a ramble as usual, but our next question. Thank you for the story. I read it for the first time today, and I was delightfully surprised to see how intersectional the story is and that you chose to tell it that way. Can you talk about the intersectional surprises you found as you were creating the book? Um, you know, this was interesting, I will say, because there is the Revolutionary War is incredibly well documented, and we owe a lot to armchair historians, family histories, and of course, broad professional historians who have been doing this work for centuries now. But little things like Sylvia and Charity Bryant really took me by surprise, right? This kind of sapphic romance that happened in daylight, or Public Universal Friend kind of decrying pronouns and taking on a whole new identity, which is very queer coded, if not explicitly queer, right? And so, kind of finding where our history intersects with other marginalized groups is so interesting and kind of foundational to what the book is about, right? I'm hoping that I would love to read the graphic novel about Sylvia and Charity Bryant. Their life is actually exhaustingly well researched. So if you ever want to look up some of their poetry, for example, it's been printed. So the characters like that, it felt a necessity to paint a broader picture of queer identities and just the idea of being the other during this revolutionary era.
Yeah, and I would say, somebody like Deborah Sampson, who is,
Mhm.
you know, one of those characters who's sort of there's a bit of gray area in terms of, how could we really claim her as queer, but she's certainly gender fluid in the way that, she sort of her story unfolds, right? The Mulan style story of trying to pass as a man to fight for the revolution is certainly very interesting, and I think worthy of including, even if we're not able to really like pinpoint, where she might have fallen on the spectrum.
Yeah,
Um,
and we think about these people kind of disappearing from public life once they're caught, right? And so that's not the case in Deborah Sampson's situation. She went on and did a number of speaking tours. She was widely beloved as the woman who fought in the revolution. When she died, her husband received a pension from the military. It was the first such pension ever awarded to a male widower. And so that was I'm sorry to say revolutionary at the time too. Um, and so, or even, oh gosh, who's some others? Or, for example, conversely from that, there are queer people who are drummed out of history. Von Steuben uh, lived an open life, but there were people at Valley Forge who were expelled for sodomy charges and literally drummed out of Valley Forge during the harsh winter. And those people we never hear from again. They're completely lost to the historical record. So there is a bit of tragedy, and like you said earlier, Levi, kind of a class disparity about who gets to have history and who doesn't get to have history.
right, like to the intersectional point, it also highlights like there's almost no records of, people of color, enslaved people, native people. It's like that's a whole different, you just sort of vacuum from our current historical knowledge, right? And it's hard not to be able to include those stories.
Yeah, and it was it's a bit of a tap dance to celebrate the contributions of von Steuben, see his shortcomings, and also compare them to the contributions and shortcomings of the other founding fathers. That's not to say we make excuses for anyone, but Benjamin Franklin was known for his sexual conquests, and George Washington was named town destroyer by indigenous native people because of the genocides that he helped perpetuate. And so this is a complicated era with, I would say, a few heroes, but they are foundational to the life we live today and our understanding of what American history is. Um, let's see. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and so we have a nice note from Clint. Thank you for both for joining us. It's a wonderful book, and I wanted to thank you for the panel, a panel that brought you to tears. Uh, oh my gosh, the pickup, I'm assuming pickup truck driving off while throwing insults and trash at one of our young authors, me. Uh, that could have been ripped from your teenage years. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, which people think of being a liberal paradise, but I grew up in a very conservative pocket of it. And then Levi, you grew up in Idaho, so you're no stranger
Yeah, yeah,
to
deeply
that.
conservative. Yeah. Um, right. I mean, it seems like a very universal queer experience, right? You sort of deal with some level of this, no matter where you grow up, right? Unfortunately, this is still, unfortunately, a reality of queer life. Um, wish it were not the case.
Yeah, I
But
think
yeah, I think it's important it's important to include it to kind of to show like where we came from, and that this doesn't really. I just think it continues to reinforce like the reason why we do this kind of work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm so grateful to, oh my God, all the people who've helped us make this book, going back to the people who bought our hand printed comic, right? For
Yeah.
$5, and the Nib giving us the support to encourage us to release the first von Steuben biography we did. It's like 30 panels of comic compared to this beast. and everyone who supported us at Abrams Publishing and the Shirley line. So, we don't do this in a vacuum, and any kind of support that you can offer queer authors, queer historians, and just any kind of historian offering a little unknown stories, hidden stories, underserved history and heroes. Yeah, please continue to support queer history.
Yeah, we're really grateful for the museum for hosting us for this. It's really lovely to be able to talk about it.
Ooh.
It was an absolute delight to hear you talk about your process and, all of the things that brought you here to this book. And we would love to continue to highlight these queer histories, any underrepresented histories. So it's right mission aligned with what we're doing. So thank you both for taking the time to have this discussion with us. And thank you to all who attended as well. If you have any future questions, please feel free to email the museum and I will make sure that they get to Josh and Levi. In the meantime, we wish you a lovely evening and thank you again to the fantastic author and illustrator. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Happy Pride.